So today, first and foremost, let us deal with what we call as the teachings of Zoroaster concerning God. Now we see that his teachings with regards to God are rooted in a kind of a personal, free and direct relationship between the humanity and divine. So here we see that his philosophy will focus on freedom with responsibility, and in this way we see that persons are free to choose. So what do we understand by this whole freedom with responsibility? Okay, so freedom is given. Okay, so if something is given, to make use of it, what are the implications which come with it? So in other words, when we come to freedom with responsibility, we see that it is you're given something, but then you're also responsible for using it properly. So when it comes to religion here, as we move later on, we'll see how this freedom of responsibility also gives you a certain element of choice in what you select. So ultimately whatever you do is based on you. There is nobody who is forcing you to do anything. So here you are free to choose between good and evil. So now when we speak about Zoroaster's relationship with God, so what did we see yesterday? He considered himself as somebody who had a what type of communication with God? Face to face, right? So he is the one who communicated to God, with God directly, and therefore he describes his role as one who speaks with God, okay, and listens to his reply. And therefore this kind of a relationship which he has with God is in a way built on mutual respect. There is a lot of trust and there is also free choice. Exactly. So now yesterday we saw that the yasana are the Zoroastrian, what are they? They are the liturgical texts, right? So now in these liturgical texts, Zoroaster is shown as God's friend and chosen one. So now when it comes to yasana, okay, 50.6, so we can basically equate this to how we have the Psalms, right? Psalm 1, 2, etc. So in this way, in yasana 50.6, Zoroaster is called as the prophet who raises his voice in veneration. Okay, so here he is shown as somebody who has a very active role in spreading the truth, in spreading divine wisdom. In Yasna 46.2, he is shown as a close ally, in the sense a close friend of God and a true enemy to the followers of lies and evil. And in this way he is a follower of the truth. And finally in Yasna 44.11, here he is seen as the chosen one, the one who is chosen by Ahura Mazda. But we see that this choice is not imposed on him. Okay? Zoroaster freely chooses So Zoroaster is freely choosing to follow God's path, and he also recognizes the holiness of Ahura Mazda, and therefore he chooses for himself the spirit which is the most holy. So here we see that his whole relationship with God is depicted in these liturgical hymns. Now this freedom is a very important aspect of Zoroaster's relationship with God. Why do you think the freedom is important here? Now what happens when there is freedom given to somebody? Okay, express freely, good, then? Okay, you have space to think creatively. Yes, that is good. Anything else which comes with freedom? Just take for example, in your life, okay, take one part. So let's say for example that you have the freedom to kind of do certain things personally. So when we see that certain duties which are there are not in common, but you are given the freedom when it comes to your spiritual duties to do it in the room. Now what implications come with that? Okay, so you can do or don't do, that is one thing. But say for example, now you have the whole concept of morning prayer is not, you don't have to come to the chapel and pray. You can pray also in your room. You are given that freedom. Now what happens as a result of that? Okay, so one is self-realization is good. Then okay, let's look at the positive. What happens in the positive side? Okay, let's take for example, let's change the question a bit. You are forced to come to the chapel to pray. Okay, so what would happen in that situation? You have no option, but you have to come. If you do not come, you will either have some kind of punishment or some kind of extra chores or something to do. Okay, one is fear, then irritation will be there. Okay, frustration. How will, even if you pray, what your prayer will be like? Okay, anger, but yes, meaningless, meaningless. Why? Because you're doing something out of compulsion just for the sake of doing. Similarly, when we look at other activities in our life, when there is a compulsion, we just sometimes do it, because we have to do it, we do it for the sake of doing. Okay, now what happens when we do things for the sake of doing? There is no kind of depth in it. It's just a very shallow, superficial level. Therefore, when the whole emphasis of freedom with responsibility here is that whatever you do, you're doing it because you want to do it. Okay, and that is why we see that Zoroaster's relationship with God is based on this. That means he chooses, okay, and he freely, in a way, has the ability to make the choice. And that is why it is very important. So when we look at his concept of freedom and responsibility, here he says that the responsibility or the relationship is based on freedom and moral responsibility. That means we humans are not just slaves. Okay, that means our duty is not just to perform sacrifices, perform rituals, etc. But we are free beings with conscious choices. And here he compares to how in other religions humans can be like slaves or kind of just servants to God's will, not having any choices but condemned in a way to perform certain things, condemned to a certain way of life. So here he says that we have the conscious choice to make between truth and falsehood. Blur, right? We'll have to shut off everything and Okay. Okay, so anyway, PPT will be there put up, so you can, there it is coming clear. Okay, so coming back to this, so what is the central theme in Zoroastrianism? What we have seen is the dualistic theme between good and evil, that constant battle. So here we see that the mission of Zoroaster is to awaken humanity to this freedom of choice, in the sense that to make them aware of what is the responsibility that comes with this freedom. As we took that example of freedom to pray in the room, freedom is given with the understanding that you will do certain things. Okay, when we get freedom to use gadgets, when we get freedom to maybe go elsewhere, the whole understanding or the whole assumption is that the person will not misuse it. Now, even when we speak about Christianity, there is the whole element of free will, free choice. Okay, but we see that God hopes that we choose the good. That we have the choice to choose between good and evil, but He hopes that we choose the good. So here we see that whenever freedom is given, the hope is that it will be used responsibly. And in this way, we see that this is something that also helps individuals to grow in depth, to grow more in love of the divine. Now when we take a look at good and evil, so Zoroaster's whole understanding of good and evil is in a way connected to what he believed Ahura Mazda revealed to him. So basically whatever was revealed to him, as we know that he listened everything to what God was telling him, and then he communicated that to the people. So here, good is anything that is aligned to the will of God. So anything, whatever is in accordance, whatever is according to God's will is good. So here what is good is worshipping one God and following truth and righteousness. And therefore we see that Ahura Mazda is the ultimate good, right? With what we saw last time. Now what would be evil? If we have seen good is everything that aligns with God's will, what will be evil? Okay, something that goes against God's will. So anything that contradicts divine order, anything that goes against the will of God. So also for him, evil was anything that continues the practice of old polytheistic religion. So that means earlier there were these polytheistic religions where you had worship of many deities. So by logic we see that if it is good to only worship one God, then therefore worshipping many gods would be considered as bad or evil. Now Zoroaster in a way condemned the plurality of gods that was worshipped by ancient Iranians. Okay, and he believed that all their religious practices that were associated with these many gods or many deities were false and harmful. Now what was in the old religions, what was very much common? What were some of the rituals which were very common in those days? Okay, sacrifices were there. And then, now when we speak about sacrifice, what comes to mind? Okay, animals. And yes, offerings, yes. But when we look at offerings, now let's look at the broader picture. What else can we associate with it? Now when something is sacrificed, what happens in the whole process? Yes, there is blood, there is violence, right? So in a way, for him, how can something be good when there is violence involved in it? And therefore he viewed these as morally wrong. Okay? Because they were violent and it involved a lot of bloodshed. Next, we see his denunciation of the old religion. Now, his teachings were quite revolutionary, basically because it rejected the polytheism that was there in the Indo-Iranian religions. Okay, so now we see that the Rig Veda provides a number of insights into the religious practices that were present during those times. Now Zoroaster rejects these traditions, particularly the pantheon of gods. Okay, the worship of many gods and having a temple where you had many altars dedicated to different deities. Okay, and this is done in favor of one god. Now we see that particularly in the Yash, he basically also denounced or ignored many of the gods, but we see that these also were later incorporated by his followers. So we see that in spite of his vision, of having only one god, later on polytheism is reabsorbed by his followers. Now the gods were reinterpreted as yazatas, which we see are equal to angels. We can compare them to angels, or they are something as worshipful beings. That's something that is capable of being worshipped. Now these are subordinate to Ahura Mazda. So we see that even though he tried his best in order to kind of eliminate polytheism, his followers in a way reabsorbed polytheism, reabsorbed the belief in many deities, because in a way it was very difficult to kind of maintain a monotheistic religion in the context where there is already the culture of worshipping many gods. Therefore, we see that in certain cases, this whole concept of inculturation comes in. Why? Because you also have to have something which the people can easily associate with. So probably this could be one of the reasons why his followers had to, in a way, bring in some concepts of polytheism in Zoroastrianism. Now we see that the role of truth. Truth was something that was very important and a very central concept for Zoroaster. Now this, he says that Ahura Mazda is the ultimate good, he is the ultimate truth, and it is only by aligning with God or with Ahura Mazda that humans can live a righteous and truthful life. He also brings the concept of druj, that is the lie. Lie which opposes the truth, and this represents falsehood, chaos, and moral corruption. And therefore, in a way, his teachings invite us to live a righteous life, live a truthful life, moving away from this corruption and falsehood. And therefore, this is a moral decision that each and every person is expected to take, to follow the truth and to give up the lie. Now he challenges his followers, in the sense he invites them first and foremost to abandon the old ways that they have been following and to embrace a new faith in Ahura Mazda. So this is not only a religious, but it is also a moral challenge. So when we speak about rejecting polytheism, what comes to our mind? Okay, is it only rejecting the deities, or does it imply something else? Okay, following one God, yes, but when we say that we are not supposed to worship many deities, what is associated with that? Rituals. So that means you are also not supposed to follow the other rituals, follow the other practices that are associated with the polytheistic religions. So in this way, as we have seen earlier, he viewed those rituals or sacrifices as morally corrupt and violent. Therefore, for him, one should not associate with those rituals and practices. So in a way, he also invited his followers to move away from the past. In the sense, okay, in the past you have been following different deities, now move towards one God. And here he basically invited them to take personal responsibility. And to have moral choices and to make conscious choice in favor of the good or truth. So his teachings were not only about how it is important to worship one God, but also how to live a good life, how to live a life that was in alignment with the principles of God or with the divine principles. Now we see that in Zoroastrianism, the concepts of Ahuras as well as Devas come into being. So you have the Ahuras and you have the Devas. Now these are seen as two opposing classes of deities. Okay, when we look at them in detail, we'll understand them much better. But in short, we see that in the Indo-Iranian religions, okay, so in a way, there was a lot of cultural divergence. So you had two type of deities. One was the Asuras. These were associated with principles of order, righteousness, and authority. Whereas the Devas were connected with natural forces like sky, storms, okay, and elements of nature. But however, we see that as the Indo-Iranian civilization splits up into Indian civilization and Iranian civilization over the course of time, we see that these classes of deities go in different directions. Okay, so when we look at India, as things are recorded in the Rig Veda, we see that Devas get associated with divinity and they become central gods. While Asuras are demonized. Okay, they are viewed as demons, they are viewed as some different other forces, as forces of chaos or evil. So what this meant is that devas were associated with the gods, whereas asuras were seen as demons or forces of evil. Now this was what was happening in India. In Iran we see the opposite happens. Okay, so the asuras have divine status and devas are considered as demons and forces of evil. Now we see that because of this understanding, in Zoroastrianism you have the worship of Ahura Mazda and condemnation of the devas. Okay, so now we'll stop for today with this, and next time we shall look at the how Ahura Mazda was able to dethrone the devas. So before we move along, can we look at certain similarities now between Zoroastrianism and Christianity? Okay, what are some of the similarities? Okay, freedom is there. Then, okay, good and evil is seen. But when it comes to kind of principles, okay, one God, then okay, one by one. Okay, so just how Moses also had a kind of a revelation. Okay, then life after death. Then also you can consider the concept of angels, right? Okay, how the Isuranga, you had something to say? Okay, concept of truth. Then also here we can see they have this, now this inversion that takes place, right, between the devas and the asuras. We can see that how culture also influences different kind of religions in that way. So in one way you have devas becomes divinity. That's why you can see in Hinduism, okay, the deities are called as devas, right? Now the same gets opposite connotation in Iran. Okay, so here we see that how culture also faces, and now you can see that why in Zoroastrianism asuras are seen as the angels or worshipable beings, with Ahura Mazda as the main kind of ultimate deity.